This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. I lost my memory, remembering everyone except him. I looked at my handsome but ill-tempered husband who doesn't like me and shrugged. Find some time to get a divorce. When Rocky picked me up from the hospital, I almost called the police. It was only when he showed me our marriage certificate that my doubts were somewhat dispelled. I looked at the certificate with the couple who didn't seem to depend on each other and asked him, "Are you really my husband? You don't seem to love me." Rocky's annoyed expression froze. I shouldn't have married someone who doesn't love me. There must be some mistake. Rocky took me back to our home. As soon as the door opened, it was pitch dark. Rocky stumbled and complained, "Why does this place have to be raised?" I had no memory of this home and didn't know how to answer him. It was so dark in the entryway that Rocky couldn't find the light switch after feeling around for a long time. He then asked, "Where's the light?" I replied, "Isn't this your home?" Rocky fell silent, and after a while, he finally found the switch behind a vase. The warm yellow light illuminated the entryway, seemingly dispelling the darkness in the living room. I seemed to recall something. I remembered that no matter how late it was, the entryway was always lit waiting for Rocky to come home, just like I always kept my heart open for him. I came back to reality and saw Rocky holding a note, probably torn from the switch. I glanced at it. It had my handwriting saying, "Congratulations, Rocky. You finally found the switch." I couldn't help but laugh. Was I this childish before? Rocky had been observing me and, upon hearing this, threw the note aside and replied, "Not only were you childish, but also jealous." I raised an eyebrow and asked, "Do you have someone else outside?" He stuttered and then angrily questioned me. "Hailey, are you pretending to have amnesia? Stop making unreasonable scenes. I don't have time to play with you." They all suspected I was faking amnesia, since I hadn't had an accident or suffered a major shock. Just a simple nap, and then I didn't recognize Rocky anymore. I stared at Rocky, not remembering the person in front of me, having forgotten all feelings for him. My heart told me that I used to love him deeply. I suddenly smiled. "You're feeling guilty." Rocky ignored me and walked towards the living room. The light in the living room was on the left. Rocky could easily turn it on with a slap, but he sat on the warm white sofa, sulking and not looking at me. I curiously glanced at the switch. Rocky was tall, and the spot he easily reached was out of my reach without stretching my arm. I really am too harsh on myself. Rocky frowned. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you? I told you I don't have time to play with you." I sat on a small chair opposite him, surveying the room. "If there's no time, then don't play." I took out the marriage certificate Rocky had given me. "Find some time to get a divorce." Rocky didn't even lift his eyes, replying quickly, "Afraid I'd change my mind." "All right, that's what you said." I nodded and, feeling a bit tired after staying in the hospital for so long, asked Rocky, "Which room is mine?" Rocky looked at me suspiciously, as if assessing whether I was lying or really had amnesia. He led me to the bedroom door and then leaned against the doorframe, staring at me. I rummaged through several cabinets and finally found my pajamas, also seeing Rocky's. The two sets were matching couple styles, but Rocky's was very new and clearly never worn. I still neatly folded them side by side. I bypassed his set and took out a nightgown. "I'm going to change. Do you want to watch?" Rocky raised an eyebrow and then reminded me, "Don't forget to go for the divorce tomorrow morning." I waved my phone at him. "Don't worry, I've already made an appointment." He seemed surprised. "When did you make the appointment?" I shrugged. "As soon as I saw you, I planned to get a divorce." Rocky seemed very angry. He pressed his lips together, furrowed his brow, and stared at me for a long time. Finally, he said nothing and turned to leave. I closed the door and lay on the soft bed. The light from the living room filtered through the gap in the door. I got up to turn off the light but found Rocky in the living room, tapping away at his computer. The cold white light in the living room made the distance between us feel even greater. It was like another world. Suddenly, he turned to me and asked coldly, "Why aren't you asleep? Regret it?" I calmly went to the kitchen, poured a glass of warm water, and grabbed a bottle of coffee for him from the fridge. He took the coffee with suspicion, drank a sip, and immediately frowned. "Hailey, what are you doing?" Judging by his reaction, he probably doesn't like coffee. I took a sip of warm water and said, "To help you wake up." Rocky frowned and glared at me. "I'm already awake enough." I smiled. "That's good. I thought you were living in a dream, able to say such things." Rocky remained silent, pressing his lips together. I realized he seemed to be deliberately avoiding arguing with me. Is he afraid I might regret it? I don't remember what Rocky used to be like, perhaps full of vigor or calm and reserved. But he certainly shouldn't be like this, which makes me feel annoyed. My annoyance with Rocky continued into the next morning, as he drove me to the Civil Affairs Bureau. I had woken up too early and had low blood sugar, leaning against the car seat to catch some sleep. Rocky, however, seemed to be in the mood to reminisce, pulling me into memories from when I chased him, our marriage certificate, and renovating the house, going on and on. My head ached from listening and I couldn't help but interrupt. "You're so good at talking. Why not tell me how you met that third party?" Rocky fell silent, but he also admitted, through his silence, that he had been unfaithful. I listened to Rocky's version of our story, where I admired him, even demeaning myself like a humble follower worshipping a deity. Now, without the old filter, I realized how annoying Rocky was. After finally arriving at the Civil Affairs Bureau, we were greeted by a young woman. She first glanced at Rocky and then smiled at me, saying, "To get a divorce, you need to wait for a 30-day cooling-off period." She gave me a warm, friendly smile, but her eyes sent a different message. "Don't regret it." I looked up at Rocky. He was tall, handsome, dressed in a suit, and his hair was meticulously styled, clearly a wealthy intellectual. The young woman must have been mistaken. Being intellectual doesn't necessarily mean engaging in intellectual pursuits. Rocky was more anxious than I was. He frowned and asked, "Do we really have to wait for the cooling-off period?" The young woman glanced at her computer and replied with a smile, "Sorry, sir, it's the rule." I shrugged to indicate that I understood. Rocky sighed, took back our documents, and coldly said, "I have a meeting soon. I'll leave first." Rocky drove away, and I had to take the bus to work. Fortunately, the Civil Affairs Bureau was not far from the bus stop. I saw the station after just a short walk around the corner. The timing was unfortunate. It was rush hour, and I looked at the crowded people in front of me, stepping back a bit. In doing so, I almost stepped on a cat's tail. I apologized to the cat and looked up to see its owner watching me. He was probably in his 20s, pale-faced, and frail, as if recovering from a serious illness. He smiled with squinted eyes. "You're the first person I've seen apologize to a cat." I sat next to him, keeping a bit of distance. I'm also seeing someone walking a cat for the first time. His cat was black with white paws, like it wore 4 white gloves. The cat was very close to him, lying still by his feet. "Your cat is really attached to you." He smiled and said, "Animals have a spirit. He might know I'm not long for this world." I was shocked, "But you're so young." He looked up at the sky, his eyes flickering with light. "Being young doesn't help. Living is what matters." I wanted to offer words of comfort, but seeing the young man's eyes, I couldn't bring myself to speak. Buses came and went, and the crowd at the station gradually thinned. In the end, only the two of us were left. The young man continued to look up at the sky, fragmented sunlight dancing in his brows. "I'm actually ill too," I said calmly. "I have amnesia, remembering everyone except one person." After a long pause, his calm voice came through. "That person must be very important to you." Very important. Just forgetting him has left a huge void in my heart. Despite the bright sunshine, I felt increasingly cold, unable to stop myself from shrinking. I stubbornly lied, "Not important, I hate him." The cat rubbed against my ankle, and I couldn't help but reach down to pet its head. The young man glanced at me with his bright eyes and shallow dimples on both sides of his smile. He extended his hand. "I'm Tony. This is my cat, Lucky." Later, I finally got the bus I wanted. Before getting on, Tony took the initiative to exchange contact information with me, saying he knew a brain specialist who might be able to introduce us. On the way, I leaned against the bus window, lost in thought. When I reached the studio, I didn't notice my colleague Alice coming with an easel, and we collided. Alice always wore large black-rimmed glasses and kept her head down to avoid conversations. The only time she spoke was when receiving her salary. She would softly say, "Thank you, boss." Though Alice was very reserved, her paintings always had a beam of light shining from afar, always bright and hopeful. I picked myself up from the ground and hurried to check on Alice. "Are you okay?" She turned away from me, hurriedly clutching the easel and leaving. Serena came over to examine my hand. "Your palm is scratched, and you're still concerned about others?" After all, I was the one who bumped into him. Serena found some iodine to treat my wound. "A painter's hands are the most precious. You should take better care of them." I gave a sheepish smile. Serena put away the iodine and suddenly seemed to remember something, asking, "Did your husband make things difficult for you yesterday?" I asked, "Why would he do that?" Serena rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, who doesn't know that Rocky has a pompous, arrogant personality? Yesterday, he came to pick you up, and you publicly accused him of being a human trafficker, making him lose face. Didn't he come back and cause trouble for the divorce?" It seemed Serena really disliked Rocky. I nodded. We're divorced. I initiated it. I just returned from the Civil Affairs Bureau. Serena's eyes widened, and after a while, she clasped her hands and earnestly prayed, "Heaven bless, my birthday wish came true." "What?" I asked, confused. Serena gave me a look. My birthday wish was to become extremely slim and rich, and for Hailey to escape from her misery. "Well, your wish seems quite accurate," I replied, then asked, "I don't understand why I ended up marrying someone like Rocky. I did love Rocky once, but not the current Rocky. There must have been some change in the memories I've forgotten." I looked at Serena hopefully, hoping she could provide an answer. Serena was my seatmate in high school and my classmate in college. In the part of my memory that was missing from my student years, Serena was my closest friend. Everyone suspected I was faking amnesia, and Serena did too, but she only gave me a few suspicious glances before picking up the hot tea on the table. "Former Rocky would blow this tea to a comfortable temperature and hand feed it to you," she said, then poured the tea into the bucket by her feet. "But the current Rocky wouldn't even look at you while dumping out the tea." At the same time as Serena's words, fragmented images flashed in my mind. Rocky, wrapped in a heavy winter coat, stood downstairs, looking up at me with a smile. His lips were pale and moving silently. It seemed he was saying, "Hailey, let's get married after graduation." Serena suddenly grabbed my shoulders and shook me vigorously, pulling me back to reality. "Hailey, don't look back. The current Rocky isn't worth it." I was confused but nodded firmly. In the evening when I got off work, I saw Rocky waiting for me at the door. He stood leaning against the car, dressed in an expensive suit, arms folded across his chest, staring into the distance, lost in thought. The dusk cast a shadow of gloom over him, with only the breeze offering some solace. Serena pinched my arm and whispered, "Don't look back." I smiled at her, and Serena sighed before walking away with her boyfriend. It seemed Rocky heard us as he turned and looked at me with a calm tone. "Get in the car." I opened the back door and sat down, and Rocky just glanced at me without saying anything. We remained silent on the way, but this silence felt familiar. As the surroundings grew increasingly unfamiliar, I couldn't hold back any longer and asked, "Rocky, where are you taking me?" Without even looking at me, Rocky replied with a cold face, "Didn't you say you'd come for French cuisine every Monday? Was this an agreement we had before?" I responded gruffly, "I don't want to eat it anymore. Just take me to your place. I'll move out later." Rocky abruptly pulled over to the side of the road and turned back with a look of annoyance. "Hailey, how long are you going to keep this up? I've remembered all your demands. Isn't that enough?" His words stirred my anger. I took off my bag and threw it at Rocky's detestable face. "I'm not causing trouble. I've already divorced you." Rocky's face darkened, and he rolled down the window, tossing the bag outside. I was even angrier. "Rocky, go get it back." Rocky laughed coldly. "Do you think I'm your pet dog? What are you, a spoiled young lady?" Slap. I slapped Rocky across the face. The car fell into silence. Rocky's eyes widened, and one side of his face started to swell. He probably didn't expect me to hit him, but this slap made us both calm down. "Rocky, marriage is something between two people. It's not a shackle or what you call my demands. It's our home." My heart ached, and though I was the one who hit Rocky, I felt more pain than he did. Rocky turned halfway, looking back at me in silence. Familiar yet strange memories washed over me like a tsunami, making it hard to breathe. I suddenly remembered that Rocky used to sit in front of me in high school. He would often turn back to look at me with raised eyebrows and a smile full of youthful pride. He said, "Hailey, can you call my name when you come to watch the game this afternoon?" He said, "Hailey, can I call you on the first snowy day?" He said, "Hailey, you look so cute with your furrowed brow while solving problems." He said, "Hailey, run boldly. No matter where you go, I will always catch up with you." He liked calling me Hailey because it sounded cuter. I will always be moved by the 18-year-old Rocky, but the 28-year-old Hailey will no longer fall in love with the 28-year-old Rocky. With one side of his face swollen and red, Rocky remained silent. I opened the car door and walked away, unwilling to look back. Inside the car, Rocky's outstretched hand trembled as it fell. This was the price time made him pay. I wouldn't look back, and Rocky wasn't worth a second glance. That night, I moved out of Rocky's house. He asked darkly, "Are you so eager to leave?" I carried my suitcase and didn't even glance at him. Every second counts. Rocky said nothing and silently turned on the light in the hallway for me. As I dragged my luggage to the door, he suddenly called out to me with a trembling voice, "Hailey." I stopped in my tracks. Rocky was proud. He lowered his head and asked in a voice almost pleading, if we could go back 10 years, would you?" The only answer was the door slamming shut. On Wednesday, at Tony's invitation, I went to the hospital to see the neurologist. The specialist's office felt inexplicably familiar, even though it was my first time there, which puzzled me. The man seemed to sense my confusion, handed me a cup of warm water, and reassured me with a magnetic voice. Don't be nervous. I'm Peter, a psychology minor, skilled at influencing people through their environment. I looked up at him in a daze. His smile was warm, and though his features were unfamiliar, they gave me a sense of familiarity. Have I seen you somewhere before? He sat down across from me, fingers interlaced, and smiled easily. I have an excellent memory, Miss Hailey. We must have never met. His voice was slow, carrying a strangely convincing quality. My vision blurred, and I only faintly heard him say, Miss Hailey, I hope you won't regret your decision. As I stumbled out of the consultation room, Tony was waiting at the door and handed me my backpack and phone. Are you okay? I leaned against the wall and forced a smile, feeling like I had forgotten something but couldn't recall what. Tony stayed with me at the hospital for a while. I eventually recovered my composure, though my head still buzzed, and I could walk normally again. We parted at the door, and he waved as he turned to leave. I felt a bit embarrassed. You've accompanied me all this way. Let me treat you to a meal. Tony smiled. No need. You've already treated me. I was taken aback. He added, in the corner of your forgotten memories, we were once friends. On the way back, I kept pondering Tony's words, trying hard to remember if I had seen him before. Lost in thought, I accidentally sketched Tony's face. Serena rolled her chair over and teased, nice job, turning a bottle into a handsome young man. Second spring? I immediately denied, of course not, he's only 20. Serena clicked her tongue and continued examining my drawing of Tony, commenting, this person looks so lifeless, not like a living being, but more like an inanimate object. Tony gave me that impression, like a cat immersed in darkness, with only its eyes containing the sun. He too hoped to escape the darkness, and hoped for a stroke of luck. On Friday, Tony was hospitalized. I learned from the neurologist that if Tony didn't have surgery, he might not survive more than 3 months. I asked why Tony wasn't undergoing surgery. He said, because the success rate is only 10%. When I went to visit Tony, I brought a bouquet of flowers and tried to lighten the mood with some jokes. Tony smiled back, but often gazed at the sky outside. He said, I miss Lucky. Unfortunately, the hospital doesn't allow pets. I cautiously asked, do you have any other family here? I wanted to know their decision regarding Tony's surgery. Tony turned and smiled at me, a forced smile. I have no family left. I was the only survivor of a car accident 3 years ago. Now, I'm leaving too. He continued to look out the window, the sunlight embracing him through layers of obstruction, kissing the corners of his eyes and hair. He looked like a pale and frail young man, like an iris about to break. I felt a deep sorrow, but in front of him, any words I said seemed powerless. I visited Tony frequently. In the first week, he could still go out with me to enjoy the sun. In the second week, he sat in a wheelchair, coughing up blood. In the third week, Tony's hair was shaved off. He lay in bed, weakly smiling at me, asking what I wanted to do most in my life. I thought carefully, but found I had nothing I particularly wanted to do. Tony didn't care about my lack of an answer. He gave me a set of keys and an address. Please take care of Lucky. That night, when I went to pick up Lucky, it was curled up next to the mobile camera, in a place where Tony could see it if he turned on the camera. Lucky, be good. Lucky barked a few times in a hoarse voice, as if it had called out countless times. It couldn't find Tony anymore, so it stayed in the only place where it could still hear Tony's voice, waiting for him. The next day, I removed Rocky from my blacklist. Our divorce cooling-off period had ended, and we could officially finalize the divorce. I had an appointment for 9 o'clock. Rocky arrived a little late, no longer dressed so impeccably, and looking somewhat disheveled. His eyes brightened slightly when he saw me, but then quickly dimmed again. When I saw him approaching, I turned to leave, but Rocky grabbed my arm. I couldn't break free and frowned at him. Rocky's eyelashes trembled as he asked hoarsely, Hailey, don't you want me anymore? My back tensed up instantly, and it felt like a knife was twisted in my chest, causing excruciating pain. I had truly loved Rocky. I don't, I replied, suppressing my voice. Rocky, I don't want you anymore. With those words came the past 10 years with him. It was him in his school uniform, basking in the sunlight, casually shooting hoops, smiling and saying, Hailey, why are you so late? If you don't come, who will I show off to? It was him resting his chin on his hand, watching teachers leave, tilting his head and smiling at me. Hailey, want to go for some spicy hot pot after school? It was him, sick and leaning against the wall, looking pitiful and saying, Hailey, I feel like I'm about to collapse. Remember, there's a coin tucked in page 27 of my math book. It's all I have. Cough. Why are you hitting me? It was him blushing, kneeling in a field of flowers. Hailey, from now on, you're my whole world. It was him coming home later and later after getting married, holding me and dreaming about the future. While his phone screen lit up with a message, I feel awful. Can you come keep me company? It was his growing annoyance, and the decreasing number of words he spoke to me. It was his poor excuses on my birthday to spend time with someone else. Our company's cat is sick and needs looking after. These were our 10 years, my once youthful boy, and the decade that was drifting apart. Tears suddenly streamed down my face. Rocky, I don't want you anymore. After completing the divorce paperwork, I freed myself from the lingering Rocky and headed to visit Tony, bringing a bouquet of flowers. At the hospital elevator, I encountered Peter, the neurologist. He saw me and raised an eyebrow, smiling. Miss Hailey, do you remember me this time? I did remember him. 6 months ago, when I confirmed Rocky's betrayal, I had fallen into depression and lost my appetite, eventually collapsing on the roadside, where a kind young man took me to the hospital. When I woke up, the young man was sitting by the window, quietly basking in the sunlight. He smiled at me and extended his hand. Hello, I'm Tony. I also have a cat named Lucky. At that time, he was just frail and seemed malnourished, but his eyes always shone brightly, as if they held the sun. Due to moderate depression and severe anorexia, I was forced to stay in the hospital for observation. Coincidentally, Rocky was on a business trip and was unaware of my hospitalization. In the first week, I huddled in a corner, refusing to eat or drink, living on 4 fluids. I often cried at night, and sometimes after taking medication and waking up, I would find myself sobbing uncontrollably at the corner. Tony would frequently visit me, bringing fresh flowers from the roadside, drawing the curtains, and dispelling the gloom in the room. In the second week, he introduced me to his primary doctor. That doctor was Peter. He had a minor in psychology and held a master's degree, skilled at influencing a person's psychology through their environment. I always felt calmer in his presence. After nearly half a month of treatment, he interlaced his fingers and smiled kindly. I understand why Miss Hailey is in such pain. The partner you supported during your youth has finally given his heart to someone else. Miss Hailey, what you can't let go of isn't that person anymore, but the boy from the past. How about letting go of past memories and reevaluating the people around you now to see if they're worth looking back for? What do you think? My mind was in a fog, and I couldn't even clearly hear what he said, but I knew this might be my only way out. In the following 6 months, Peter provided me with a series of psychological suggestions and used some medication, making me temporarily forget Rocky. He said, when Miss Hailey decides to let go, these memories will come back. So one day, when I woke up, I had amnesia, remembering everyone except him. I entered the elevator and gave Peter a smile, thank you. As the elevator doors slowly closed, there were only the 2 of us in the cramped space. Peter tilted his head, his formulaic smile fading, eyes glowing with fervor. I should be the one thanking you. Miss Hailey, you're excellent experimental material. I knew Peter was using me as an experiment, but I was still grateful to him. I emerged from the gloom and finally let go of the past, thanks to him. But none of this could change the fact that he was an academic madman, using real people as experimental subjects. I didn't want to engage further with Peter, so I didn't respond to him. After Peter asked me a few more questions and saw my lack of interest, he also lost interest and fell silent, until the elevator doors opened and I was about to leave. Miss Hailey, I looked back at Peter standing in the shadows, his face again wearing that formulaic, friendly smile. Tony agreed to the surgery. I was overjoyed and, after thanking him, rushed to Tony's hospital room. When I entered, Tony was curled up on a chair by the window, the sunlight warming him inch by inch. I removed the withered flowers from the vase and replaced them with the sunflowers I brought today. I sprayed some water on the flowers, looked at the droplets on the petals, and couldn't help but smile. You really do resemble a sunflower, always loving the sunshine. Tony raised his eyes slightly, his breath weak. I agreed to the surgery. If Lucky survives, please paint me a picture of the sunrise in LaSalle. Tony had mentioned this when I was depressed, but I had forgotten about it and it was left unresolved. I felt a pang of guilt. When you get better, I'll take you to LaSalle to see the sunrise in person. He closed his eyes, no longer responding, as if exhausted. Tony's surgery was scheduled for the next afternoon. Before he entered the operating room, he gave me a small hug. His last words were, Hailey, remember me. My eyes turned red, and I patted his back to comfort him. You're still young. You'll definitely be lucky. He smiled at me, closed his eyes, and said no more. The surgery lasted 8 hours. I waited outside the operating room until evening before going to feed Lucky. Tony had Lucky, so he would be fine. Lucky seemed to sense something about Tony. It refused to eat and remained motionless in front of the camera. At 9 o'clock, I prepared to stay by Tony's side again, but Lucky suddenly began to wail. It was the first time I had seen a cat cry out so desperately, rubbing its head against the camera, but the cold machine could not comfort it forever. My heart skipped a beat. 10 minutes later, I received a message from Peter. Sorry, I couldn't help but cry out loud in the car. Memories of Tony sitting in the sunlight with me during my depression surfaced. I bit my hand and tried to suppress my sobs. He had said, I have no family or friends. If I'm gone, no one will remember me. Hailey, you must remember me. I'm sorry I forgot you. I'm sorry, Tony. I stumbled my way to the hospital, and in my daze, I saw Tony again, standing in the light and extending his hand to me. Hello, I'm Tony. Tony didn't get to have Lucky, and Lucky lost Tony. Tony had no family left, so I took care of his affairs. Tony's belongings were few, and his most precious item was a cat named Lucky. After enduring the first few nights, I looked at Lucky basking in the sun and made a decision. I resigned. When Serena heard about it, she looked incredulous. Hailey, without love, we can still pursue our careers. Why are you giving up on that too? I smiled at her and said, I need to fulfill a promise. I was going to drive to Wyoming to paint the sunrise for Tony, but I wasn't actually good at landscapes. I was better at portraiture. So before I left, I made a special visit to Alice. I was willing to spend all my savings to hire him to accompany me to Wyoming to paint a sunrise. Serena didn't understand my decision. She thought it was absurd to give up everything for a vague promise. Rocky didn't understand either. He had secretly bought the studio where I worked, and when he heard I had resigned, he immediately drove over to ask me about it. I had been wondering why I had been absent from work so often recently, even though my salary had doubled. It turned out Rocky had taken over the studio. Rocky frowned and spoke quickly. If it's because of me, you don't need to resign. I can transfer the studio to you immediately. He advised me, Hailey, don't act impulsively. I looked at him calmly, observing the youthful years slipping through his hair, and asked, Rocky, why did you buy this studio? Rocky works in the information software industry. How did an obscure and profitable studio suddenly catch his eye? Rocky lowered his head slowly, his voice weak. I wanted to make some compensation for you. He seemed to realize he had said something wrong and quickly corrected himself. Of course, I know I can never fully make up for the harm I caused you, but, alright, I interrupted him. I don't want to hear your self-pitying confessions. Don't flatter yourself. My resignation is not because of you. Rocky was stunned. Then why? I looked up at the sky. The clouds that had gathered for days finally dispersed, and the sunlight broke through the clouds, casting its first light on the world. Birds flew across, leaving torn skies in their wake. My mood suddenly improved. I don't want to stay in the past. I want to see the future, a future without you. After saying this, Alice finished packing and came out. I turned and waved at him. Alice, can you drive? Alice lowered his head and answered softly, yes. I was thrilled and took Alice in the car I had bought earlier, but never had the chance to drive. Rocky stood in place, watching me slowly disappear from view until I was out of sight. Serena crossed her arms over her chest, clicked her tongue, and mocked. A person lost in the past moves toward the future, while the first to abandon the past ends up reminiscing about it. How ironic. Rocky, facing Serena, was no longer in a good mood. His face instantly grew cold as he asked Serena, "Are you mocking me?" "Oh, such a fierce look." Serena laughed and threw the resignation letter at Rocky's face. "I've resigned. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I wish you a lifetime of loneliness, never to see Hailey again." With that, she left. Rocky stood there, sighing deeply after a while. Of course, he would never see Hailey again. Hailey no longer loved him. Everything was his own doing, not caring about Rocky anymore. Alice and I drove ourselves to Wyoming. Lucky wasn't afraid of the car. Instead, like a curious child, he stuck his head out of the window, watching the scenery move by. "Your cat is really cute." Alice had become quite familiar with me and even started sharing jokes. Sometimes he would share interesting things with me. He had a mild form of autism, and the spectacular landscapes along the way slowly began to heal him. Lucky is my friend's cat. It's his treasure. Alice had heard a bit about Tony from me and felt sympathy for the sun-loving boy. Hearing me speak this way, he quickly changed the topic to avoid making me sad. On the day we entered the park, Alice and I couldn't help but shout in excitement. Alice's reaction was even more intense than mine. He immediately pulled out an easel from the trunk and started painting the distant mountains. I took a few photos with my camera, opened the easel out of boredom, glanced around, and began painting Tony. I worked on this painting for half a month, making continuous revisions, even tearing it up and starting over 7 times. But no matter how I painted, I was never satisfied. In my memory, Tony was gentle, a boy leaning against the sunlight. I painted him when we first met at the station after my amnesia, reaching out and smiling kindly. I painted him when he took me to the hospital during my depression, his smile when I woke up. I also painted him when he was gravely ill, sitting in a chair, closing his eyes, and basking in the sun. But I was still unsatisfied. It always felt like something was missing. Alice praised my discarded sketches, saying I was just too strict with myself. A few flaws were nothing. I could settle for less. I firmly told him, Tony cannot settle for less. In this world, only I remember him, and I cannot settle for less. Alice didn't understand but didn't insist further. After half a month, Alice and I waited for the sunrise with the easel in front of Yellowstone Park. The night in Wyoming was cold, and Alice had brought an extra coat for me, saying, "You can sleep for a while. When the sun rises, I'll wake you." I shook my head, thanked him for his kindness. Waiting for the sunrise was so dull that even Alice, unable to endure the boredom, told me a joke. Do you know why Christ never read Buddhist scriptures? Because he didn't speak Chinese. His joke was even more boring, but Alice's eager look made it funny. Over time, I found Alice to be like a child, fond of childish toys, sweets, and silly jokes. We became increasingly close. He started calling me Miss Hailey, and I still called him Alice. But I felt more like I was taking care of a younger brother. As more people gathered to watch the sunrise, the sun, like a shy girl, was slow to appear. Alice yawned twice, and his pen fell to the ground. The sun had not yet risen, and visibility was still low. I followed the sound to find the pen that had rolled away. The square was crowded. I kept my head down, searching between feet. Alice only liked using familiar pens. Losing this pen would make him very sad. Just as I found the pen, I heard gasps from above. I stood up with the pen and couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. The red sun burst forth from layers of green mountains, casting the first ray of its blessing upon the world. It blended with the sky over Yellowstone Park, creating a scene of peace and sanctity. Some people in the crowd knelt and chanted prayers, others clasped their hands in prayer, and some picked up their pens, looking at the sunrise with sincere faces. I finally realized what was missing in the painting of Tony. Tony was a blessing. I picked up my pen and began painting. Having painted Tony so many times recently, I quickly sketched his features, adding a blush of gold next to him, reflecting the sunrise. I painted our final meeting. He half raised his hand in an embracing pose, with a gentle smile and eyes full of regret. I also painted a blooming iris on his right hand. When Alice finished painting the sunrise, he looked at my painting. "Is this Tony? It's really different." I was surprised and asked, "How is it different?" Alice studied my painting with a frown for a long time, then hesitantly said, Before, he just seemed gentle. Now, it's a warmth, like the feeling of basking in the sun." I nodded. Alice showed me his painting of the sunrise, which matched the scene almost exactly and even had more depth. With this painting, he might become a renowned artist. Alice, however, seemed indifferent and offered me the painting. I promised to paint the sunrise for you. In the end, I didn't take that painting. I also left town with Alice. I gave permission to post his painting online, and Alice became an overnight sensation. Some of his earlier works were discovered, and there were even offers for a solo exhibition, with the sunrise painting to be the centerpiece. When Alice asked for my opinion, I told him, if possible, please include a town in your exhibition. I hope more people can remember him. Remember a gentle boy named Tony, who had a cat named Lucky. Alice's exhibition was a great success. When we returned, Serena had already moved away. She had gone to the capital to pursue her dreams. When I talked to her about her long-distance relationship, Serena responded very casually. She said, "Hailey, if he really loves me, even if it's 1,000 miles apart, even if it's just a voice on the phone, it won't stop his longing. If he doesn't love me, Hailey, that's not long distance. That's finding an out-of-town stepfather, just asking for trouble." Serena always had a sharp tongue, and I couldn't help but laugh, collapsing onto the bed. I also talked about Alice. Now, Alice's paintings were in high demand, with the highest-priced sunrise reaching $70 million. My painting, Town, also attracted high offers. Following my advice, Alice turned down all the offers and even placed a small sign next to that painting, writing Tony's name and his often repeated words. Lucky grew fatter and often curled up in his soft bed, coming out only to bask in the sun. When I called him for food, he ran fast, like he had wings. I continued to paint, leading a simple but happy life. Time, gentle as water, slowly eased the pain. The next time I saw Rocky was at Alice's celebration party. By then, Alice had already become a well-known artist. He had invited me to his party, and, despite his reluctance and fear of crowded places, he asked me to accompany him. Over the past year, Rocky had changed significantly. He had become more composed and mature. He wore a dark suit, and his meticulously styled hair complemented his refined features. He was the center of attention wherever he stood. I glanced at him briefly and then turned my attention back to the other guests. In the crowd, I saw Peter. He wore a white suit and had not styled his hair, giving him a casual, carefree look. He raised his glass to me, and I reciprocated. "I saw your painting," Peter said with a smile. If he were still alive, he would definitely like it. I clinked glasses with him and replied. If it were him, he would have straightforwardly praised my painting skills and then celebrated with me. Peter smiled but did not speak further. In the center of the room, I spotted Alice, unsteadily holding up his glass and looking around. When he saw me, he beamed with a smile. I returned his smile. Peter suddenly clinked glasses with me again. I looked up at him. He turned his face slightly and smiled. "Miss Hailey, I wonder if you might be interested later." "No interest," I interrupted him. "Peter, I have no interest in you. An academic madman who disregards human lives for experiments, I'm not interested in him at all." Peter's eyes sparkled with a deeper amusement. He set down his glass and lightly touched his wristwatch. Just as I was wondering if he was about to apply some psychological manipulation again, he suddenly laughed and said, "Miss Hailey, it seems you have a guest. I won't disturb you any longer." With that, he turned and walked away. "Well, if it isn't Miss Hailey?" A sharp voice suddenly cut in. I turned to look at the newcomer and frowned. I had seen her from a distance before. She was Rocky's object of infidelity, Amanda. To me, she seemed like a pretty face with little brain. She was Rocky's secretary. During the interview, she had made a terrible impression on me. She was forgetful, careless, and clumsy. I could count her flaws on one hand. However, she did have one quality I had to acknowledge. She was always positive and forward-looking. Even when the future seemed bleak, she had the courage to face it alone. Perhaps Rocky liked her for this reason. I was in no mood to chat with the former third party at my brother's celebration party. I ignored her provocative remarks, quickly shifting my gaze away from her to avoid contaminating my vision. Amanda, feeling rebuffed, tried to say more. At that moment, Rocky walked over, separating me from her. He raised his glass and smiled at me. "How have you been recently?" I calmly replied, "Stay away, thank you." Without changing his expression, he pushed Amanda aside and continued with a different topic. "I saw your painting. It's really impressive. You've always been good at portraiture since high school, and this time it's truly stunning." Separated from romance, Rocky now seemed like a buzzing fly to me. I wanted to swat him away and tell him to keep his distance, but I couldn't do that. I could only respond with a sarcastic smile. "Oh, Mr. Rocky, so you've made the third party your official partner?" Rocky's face immediately darkened. Amanda, undeterred, asked who the third party was. I looked past Rocky and raised my voice to her. "When Mr. Rocky and I were married, you were his girlfriend. If not the third party, were you the fourth?" The surrounding murmurs and pointing made me feel a bit vindicated. Rocky, too, was embarrassed. He sternly told Amanda to leave and explained to everyone that their relationship was merely a superior subordinate one. I stood by and found it amusing. I could see clearly he was protecting Amanda. "What do you like about her, Rocky?" I asked. Rocky's voice grew serious. "I'm not protecting her, I'm protecting you." "Protecting me?" I scoffed, struggling to keep my hand steady so I wouldn't spill the wine on his face. Was he dreaming? What nonsense was he talking? Rocky didn't answer my question. He stepped closer and, with a lowered voice, hesitantly asked, "I knew you would come today. I just wanted to." He hesitated for a long time without finishing his sentence. I was curious about his first statement. He had known I would come. So, his involvement in this celebration was indeed real. I couldn't bear his awkward demeanor and asked, "Rocky, do you want to go back to the past with me?" His face lit up immediately, his eyes shining with hope and anticipation. I smiled and then poured the wine on his face. Having been involved in an affair and now having wine poured on him by his ex-wife, Rocky's reputation would certainly plummet. He might lose some orders because of this, but how much Rocky loses has nothing to do with me. I coldly told him, "What you miss is not me but the you that once shone in my eyes." I placed the glass on a nearby table and wiped my fingers with a napkin. "Stop disgusting me, Rocky." I turned to leave, and Alice immediately followed. As we passed Rocky, he also poured wine on Rocky's face. He added, "Since Mr. Rocky's banners are fluttering, it's best not to hope for the pearl." Rocky said nothing more. He stood in the room, like a drenched dog. Alice drove me around. I raised my arms, embracing the night, embracing a new self. The night is never the source of pain. It is those unwilling to face themselves who are the true source of suffering. The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.